Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something away. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. And if you're enjoying the conversation here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you or someone you know would like to come on the show and have a chat with me, feel free to find me on the social media platform that you're on, because I'm probably there too. And the best way to find out what my handle or how to find me is you go to isaacrilevin.com, and now I'll have a list of all of my spots. All right, so with that out of the way, I'm looking forward to my conversation. My guest is somebody that I started following a little bit ago, and I've been loving their content, loving what they've been building, and I'm just looking forward to learning a bit more about them. So today, my guest is Brittany Ellich. Brittany, do you want to say hello, introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Hi, my name's Brittany. I'm a staff software engineer at GitHub, and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was thinking about this the other day. I think I've interviewed more people from GitHub on this show than I've any other thing, but I think it makes sense. Tech, open source, GitHub is like, for like Zoolander, so hot right now, right? Um,
Yeah.
but for you specifically, I want to kind of figure out how it got started for you. Like, when did you realize that technology was a thing that you wanted to be associated with?
Yeah, I have a non-traditional background, and so that is not the route that I started in. I actually have a master's degree in public health, which I'm not really using much
Sure,
of right
sure.
now. Um, and I started out working in occupational health, which is kind of a weird field where you work with like manufacturing sites or farms or whatever to make sure that their employees are being safe. And I realized I really enjoyed it, like the report writing, and
Okay.
built like all these advanced Excel tools to help me with writing the reports. And I realized like that's a whole job, so I could just do that. So I switched, and that was I think in 2017 or 2018, and it's been a great change.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that for some people, like technology kind of finds them, where it's like you're doing some
Mhm.
other job, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I need to build like this little thing, or I need to customize a spreadsheet, and then you realize that you enjoy that more than like the actual work that you're doing,
Mhm.
which is always fun. Here's a question for you, since you kind of were introduced to technology a little bit like later in life than I think some other people in tech were. Like, when did you realize that you were like naturally curious about things? Because I think people in tech have this like natural curiosity, like they kind of need to know how things are made. And like, was that something that you kind of had when you were younger, or you didn't realize it until you were a bit older that like you had this fascination with like how things are built and how things are made?
Um, yeah, I think I did have that sort of fascination and that real interest in technology. It's kind of weird. I had a lot of that, like underlying my, as a kid, I was always playing like MMOs and building my own computers and things like that, but I never really like connected the dots when I was choosing a career that like, oh, maybe I would actually like to work in software, which is very weird because I have two older brothers that are both also software engineers. So like I had the blueprint right in
Sure,
front of
sure.
me, but I never really, I think I went into college and I was like, oh, I'm not smart enough for engineering, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pick something else or whatever. Like had
Yeah,
this like idea that like, oh, I need to know math or something. Probably some weird like gender dynamics from the way
sure.
that I grew up or and was like pushed out into the world. So I never really made that connection, despite the fact that I feel like I was very interested in technology for a long time, and it ended up being a field that I really enjoy now.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of funny how there is a bit of I don't know if it's imposter syndrome, but there's like you know, I don't know if I will be good at this, so I don't even want to try it, like thing with tech
Mm.
specifically. And I think I have this whole rant about how public education kind of it turns people away from tech if you don't have like a very specific personality type. Um,
Mhm.
but I do think that there are tons of people out in the world, and you're one of them, where it's like it's all about solving problems, right? Especially now where we're focusing so much on just solving problems instead of writing code, right? It is fascinating to me where it's like, okay, it's not as much about tricking sand to be intelligent. I use that metaphor all the time, but like it's just about taking tools and solving problems. Like, here's a question for you about kind of your previous life and your current life. Do you find any similarities at all between sort of having like how you go about solving problems, kind of in your old career versus how you do in tech today?
Yeah, I think there's actually like a lot of very surprising similarities, especially around like incident response and incident like production incident management. a lot of the way that the software career or the software like folks solve those types of problems and respond to incidents has actually been pulled from incident response from occupational health
Sure.
problems. So like the idea of like an incident commander, like that's, that comes from the world of health and safety. And the way that folks communicate during incidents, or like the 5 whys approach, is all like very much from the from that area of, environmental and occupational health. So it's kind of interesting to have that background and like sort of see how we actually do respond to things, and how people, like the idea of a blameless postmortem, I think is a little bit easier to, to look at from the perspective of like keeping employees safe,
Sure.
because clearly nobody's doing something that's going to intentionally harm them. Like it's very easy to say like, oh, like clearly this was not on purpose. Whereas I
Yeah.
think it's a little bit more difficult in the software world, where people are like, oh, it was somebody being lazy with code or vibe coding now or whatever.
Yeah,
And
sure.
yeah, so I think there's a lot of crossover there. Um, and yeah, I think it's still about problem solving and getting to the bottom of a puzzle and figuring out how to make things better. So
Yeah.
a lot of crossover.
Yeah, I wonder too, like, especially now that we're kind of focusing more and more on, I guess, the soft skills of tech, right? Like, like, I think it's very, very clear, like, writing code isn't like the top priority of an engineer. It's about, you know, can you eloquently describe the problem you're trying to solve? Which I think, it's funny because I don't think in technology we're ever really taught that. Like as we go through kind of our career progression and we go to school or we go to code camp and we do all these years where it's like, okay, like I've never met an engineer in my entire life that would like write down like pseudocode or like write down like a spec of some sort before they would start coding. They would usually just start experimenting, right? And I think specifically for people that come from other careers, I always curious, and I want to ask you this question: like, do you think that helps you in how you go about working with technology today? Because you have to be very deliberate in what you're asking. Because you know, I, I coined this. I don't know if anybody else has coined this. Like every time you hit enter now, it costs money, right? And I'm curious to know like what your thoughts about like taking what's in your brain and turning it into something that can actually be valuable when you send it across to an LLM.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's a really interesting space right now, especially. I think I feel like we're just getting to the point now where we're like, all right, like these things are getting really expensive.
Yeah,
And in the past, everything's been sort of like subsidized or whatever,
sure.
but now we're really having to look at like, oh wow, it's starting to get not super cheap to use these. So I do think that we're going to be moving from this place of like excess of like use AI for everything to like now, okay, like we've had enough time to figure out how to use it. So now, let's figure out how to use it well, and what the best practices are around, how frequently you're using AI for things, so that you're not just, spending a bunch of money. I think there's a lot of folks that are also, I think the term like token maxing or
Oh
whatever, where they're
gosh,
like,
yeah.
oh, you got to spend all of the tokens or whatever. Like, I feel like that's not going to last very long.
Yeah.
um,
I
yeah.
think also too, I mean, the experience between using different tools and different models is so substantially different, right? Like, obviously you work at GitHub, so you work with Copilot all the time, but you probably use other tools, whether it's for experimentation or in your personal life. And obviously, depending on what model you're using, the prompts need to be substantially different. And, I think that uh, that is a job in and of itself, is like figuring out like how do I use this tool effectively. So like from your perspective, like what are some of the things that you have kind of learned as you've gone through this process, obviously working on tools, but also, experimenting with them, where it's like, okay, well, I need to write prompts in this way of thinking for Sonnet or for Claude based things, or I need to use this for GPT. Like maybe a little bit, talk to you a little bit like how you go about experimenting, figuring out like what the best way is to interact with some of these different tools and models.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just trial and error and seeing
Yeah.
what works well and what doesn't. My current setup is I use Opus for anything that's like, planning,
Yeah.
and then Sonnet for actually like implementing a thing. And then GPT I use for like reviewing code, or like especially if like looking at complexity, or trying to find out whether the solution that was created is like actually the best solution. And it changes. I feel like it changes though so frequently
Sure.
now with how often models come out, that it's kind of hard to like be married to any one particular way of doing things. But yeah, that's where I'm currently at now. And I just kind of came to that over trial and error and reading what other folks said about like, oh, GPT is really good at review. Or I'm like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, it is. It works both for that.
It is kind of funny because I feel like, you know, obviously people talk a lot about like that inflection moment, like over the winter holiday, right? When Opus comes out and everybody's like on 2 week vacation. And I feel like before that, everybody was talking about like only use Sonnet. Like Sonnet is like it because it was the best at the time or
Hmm.
whatever. And it's so funny you mentioned it's like every time a model comes out and everybody's got to like scramble to figure out like, is this model better than what I'm currently doing? And like you talked about earlier, like the cost of goods sold for this is starting to change very, very substantially. And I like your approach where you're talking about like maybe use the heavier models for planning and use some of the lighter models for implementation and review. I'm generally curious too, like for like I don't know if you use any of this stuff for personal projects or whatnot, but are you a bit more mindful of what you're doing for when Brittany has to actually pay money versus work at big company where you have unlimited resources, quote unquote?
Yeah, I would say so, but I also don't have like a crazy AI spend. I see a lot of that. I work in billing, so like I see a lot of like the patterns of how
Sure.
folks use AI, and like personally, my AI usage is not crazy, which is funny because I feel like I use it a lot, but maybe it's just the questions that I ask are not,
You're probably
super in
also
depth
yeah,
or
you're probably also just not YOLOing with Opus every single thing, right? I think
yeah,
I think that's a thing
exactly.
too. Like you were talking about like token maxing. I also
Hmm.
like, it's all to kind of circle back to like, maybe a little bit of how you got started in tech where it's, do you remember like the first time like you built like an actual meaningful piece of software, right? And, after you tell that story, maybe a follow-up to that is how much simple would you be able to like get an AI to build it for you? Because I love asking this question, and the reason why is because I think some people they hack away at their dreams until they have something that they want, and they don't really know how to define it, even when it's done.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's a very different way of building now. And I think that there's kind of a lot of, I think the underrated ways to use AI tools is for like product management or like really refining ideas on what it is you want to build. Right now, what that looks like for me is I will start up like a Zoom or just like create a transcript or whatever and just like word vomit the ideas that I have of like what I want it to do and then ask Opus to go through and like organize that into an actual product and then go back and forth with it to like work on like, all right, what does the design look like? And like, what do these features look like? Get features figured out in advance. Because I think it's really hard actually to build it's one thing to have an idea. It's another
Yeah,
thing to like turn that into an actual
yeah,
product.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I was thinking about this the other day because I've built like so many like, hey, Isaac has this need and Isaac builds this thing, and you talk to a friend or whatever, and like, oh, I would use something like that. And then I talk about this with open source all the time. There's like this inflection point where it's like, do I really want to share this with people? Not for
Hmm.
fear of like getting judged because the code is bad, but it's like the second I let other people use it, like I'm responsible if they have problems, right?
Yeah.
Um, have you ever been in a position where you obviously you built something for Brittany and then you realize like, oh, maybe more than Brittany would take value from this, and then you immediately regretted your decision?
Yeah, actually. So I have this app that I built. It was during the inflection point time
Sure,
around
sure.
Christmas, where I built this command center app, that like it now currently runs like my entire life, and I use it for like all notes and everything, and it just runs locally on my computer. I've gotten to a point now where there's a mobile app component of it too, and it's where I go put like, my to-do list and like my meetings and things like that all in one spot. And when I first started sharing it with folks that I work with, they were all like, "Oh, like you should make this open source and let everybody use it." I'm like, "Oh, that's a good idea." And then I realized like how much work that would be to support and like, pull back on all of the very specific things that I
Yeah.
had for myself that maybe not everybody's going to want. Um, I did end up open sourcing a part of it, which I called the Command Center Lite. And some folks I think have like looked into that, but I don't think there's a ton of folks actually using it. And I don't really have the time to like maintain it
Yeah.
the way that it probably deserves.
So what I heard is what I'm hearing is you just built like your very own personalized version of OpenClaw, which is kind of cool, I guess.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah, basically. Mhm.
I mean, it's so funny because especially around OpenClaw specifically, I'm very fascinated at people's immediate response to it, and then they immediately discover like how challenging it is to build a tool like that. That's why tools like that have never been built, right? And even the
Mhm.
current iteration, like you even hear the founder of it, he's like, this isn't like exactly what everybody wants or everybody expects, right? And I think about this with software a lot, where we we build software with a very specific intent, and over the course of time, that intent changes or the needs change or what have you. And then when you get to a finalized version or a productized version of that, it's hardly ever the same, right? Like, do you have a good
Mhm.
story about like, oh, I wanted to like, I was working on this project, I worked at this company, we built this thing, and what was built was not anywhere near what we thought we were building at the beginning?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think so, actually. But I am hoping to get into more like product engineer roles. I feel like that's a thing that I'm seeing a lot of right now is like people are now hiring for product engineers where you are figuring out the product and doing the engineering side of things. And I think that that's a really interesting, like it feels like the product management and engineering roles are sort of merging
Yeah.
right now, which is kind of cool. Um, Usually I think at least historically, by the time things engineering at the places that I've worked, they're so figured out already that there isn't a ton of some of it is like we don't really know how this is going to work, but at the end it's going to solve this problem. So I think most of my examples are things that I've built for myself where I'm like, oh, I'm going to build this tool, and then it ends up, I end up adding a million things onto it, and now, uh, you know, now it's a mobile app
Yeah,
and like
exactly,
it has
exactly.
like 11 labs integration or something like that that like you would think that you would actually need up front.
So unnecessary, right? Like I remember
Yeah.
I built this thing a handful of years ago that was somewhat popular called Presence Light, which would basically take your Microsoft Teams presence and like broadcast it like smart lights you have in your house. So like
Hmm.
if it was green, it would say green, right? Obviously this is during COVID and everybody's working from home, so that people thought it was cool and people used it. And then a bunch of
Yeah.
people from Microsoft started using it because I was working at Microsoft at the time. And over the course of time, it turned into this thing where it's like I had to worry about having conversations with like internal teams because I built basically a tool that was interacting with like Microsoft's login process, which is very locked down. And I just remember I was like, I'm not making any money off this. Like, do I want to continue to maintain this? But it's with that, I question, because especially for you, because you work in an area that is like so behind the scenes. Like,
Mhm.
where's your like passion to like be involved in open source and community from? Because you could easily be an engineer who works on the billing team at GitHub and no one knows your name and no one's ever heard of you, right? Like, what has kind of led you to this point where you've kind of turned into, like, I'm putting this in quotes, obviously, public figure of sorts?
Uh, yeah, I think that building, um, working remotely and building like just at home is very lonely.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and yeah, like I think especially as we're leaning more and more into AI, I feel like there's less and less need to actually interact with other
Mm,
humans, and that's actually kind of a fun thing. I know I like every other engineer, I'm also an introvert.
okay,
Um, but like it's nice to actually go out and like talk to people. And that's why I spend a lot of time going to like conferences and things like
sure.
that, because it's so cool to be in a space where you can just like nerd out about that one technical thing that like the people that I interact with day to day like, in my life don't really care about. And that's fine. Like right now I do a lot of stuff in like the app protocol community, which is the underlying protocol for Blue Sky and a bunch of other
Yeah.
things now. And it was so fun to get to go to Atmosphere Conf and just like get to talk to all these other people about all these ideas and like, oh wow, like what could this technology do and for people, and like how cool is it that like you can create this community around this. And I think, I don't know, just being involved in community has it's been so rewarding
Yeah.
in terms of just filling those social bubbles that I think that's typically why I do that. But yeah, I don't think it's necessary or required by any means.
Oh, for sure. I do think too, like you mentioned that, like the introverted thing, like Yeah, I find too people that say they're introverted, they're very much the hybrid introvert, where they like you're saying
Mhm.
that they love it until they're done, and then they're done, right? Like I'm kind of I'm like an extreme extrovert where I'm on constantly, which is exhausting for anybody that's around me. Um, but I'm genuinely curious, like, are you able to pretty quickly like have awareness of like, okay, I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying this conversation, but I'm gonna do what is it, the Irish goodbye, where you just kind of leave without saying goodbye to people? Are you very very good at pulling
Mhm.
that off, or do you get like a little bit of guilt?
No, I'm pretty good at pulling that one off. I don't
Yeah,
mind. I feel like I only really need that in certain settings though. Like I've gone to so many different tech conferences in the last year and a half, 2 years now that I've like figured out like these are the places where I like to be.
yeah,
Like I just got back from Google Cloud Next, which was this huge tech conference in Las Vegas with like 30,000 people. I don't think I actually had any like really long, meaningful conversations or made any new connections there. Like there's just too many humans
yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
one spot to like actually do that. I'm like, maybe those events just aren't for me. And I'm perfectly fine with just like, I'm just gonna go do my own thing and leave. And not, you know,
Yeah,
invest a bunch of time there,
well, I
but
mean,
smaller ones are better.
it's so funny that you make that comment because I feel the same way. Where the bigger, like the more quote mainstream a conference is, the less value you really get out of it. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
especially as an attendee or a speaker, like I feel like you're kind of just there, and then you're there, and then you're gone, right? Like, I've been to Microsoft Build and Microsoft Ignite and GitHub Universe and all these huge conferences, and at a particular point in time, your interactions are like I go to a booth, I talk to somebody that I like their software, so I want to learn a bit more about them or whatever. Or I'll do a talk and then I'll talk to somebody for 5 minutes afterwards, and or I'll go to the speakers room and I'll talk with speakers. But like it's very I don't want to say transactional, but it's very like this is a conversation that is going to happen, and then there's no follow up to the conversation, right? But with
Mhm.
smaller conferences, you can actually have a bit more longed out thing. People are more interested in having longer conversations because I think, to your point, there's just less anxiety because there's not 30,000 people everywhere, right?
Mhm.
Um, so specifically on the side of like, what you do at GitHub, like obviously when you build like when you're I guess like in a not exciting part of GitHub, like but it's essential to the business, like how often do you feel like you're part of GitHub versus you work at GitHub, if that makes any sense?
Mm. Yeah, I think that especially working remotely anywhere you are, like the remote culture is really on like how much you embrace it
Yeah.
and like how much you go and seek it. I feel like I seek that a lot where I'm like
Mm,
involved in a lot of different Slack channels and like I know folks from like the blog team and from, product and design and things like that. And like I personally want to go put myself in those spaces, but it's also very easy to just not do that and be like, yeah, this is my job. I'm not gonna like put any extra effort
yeah.
into it. I'm just gonna do the work and go home. So I personally feel like I'm pretty involved in it. And I like that. That's like what I like out of my career is to feel like I'm really invested in the companies that I'm working for. But I think it's also easy to not do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, especially too because I imagine that a lot of the problems you're trying to solve are like very rudimentary. Like I have some data that needs to be look in a certain way, and I need to move it over here, and I need to build a report for said data. Um, and you probably talk to colleagues all the time that are like, "Oh, I'm trying to like work on the harness to do this thing and this thing," and it just sounds like far more complicated than the things you're trying to solve, right? Do you ever get like a little bit of imposter syndrome when you talk to other people in tech solely because of the work that you do is a quote unquote like not exciting, or does it like not matter to you at all? Like, do you feel like you still bring value, and other people work on other tools to bring value in other ways?
Um, yeah, I think it kind of depends. I think the role that I'm in right now is technically like a platform role, and so like we're solving a lot of the billing problems
Yeah,
for a lot of different products, which can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. So like where I spend a lot of time working like on Copilot and like integrating that so that they don't have to think about billing. I do get a lot of imposter syndrome in general. I think just working around other folks in tech. I think feel like it's a thing that definitely I thought would go away over time.
sure,
And
yeah.
it has not at all. Like now I just semi recently, it was a couple months ago, I was promoted to staff engineer. And now I'm like, I don't know that I don't know if that's like actually a title that is
Yeah.
meaningful about what I'm doing.
You're
Like I feel like
is it one of those things where it's like, okay, so you have a conversation with your manager and they give you a promotion, you're like, who, me? Like me? Like, are you sure? Do you want to roll it? Do you want to have
yeah.
this conversation like maybe in like 2 years, 3 years, right? I mean, it is very funny too, because I think that especially in tech, because I think of the nature of tech as like we're very trying to overcome some obstacle that like when we
Mhm,
succeed, it's somewhat surprising, right? So even
mhm,
like us on the people side of tech, you're like, oh, I got promoted. Like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. To the effect that you hear about this with people all the time, where it's like, no, I have no interest in being promoted because there's effort in being promoted, and I'd rather not. I'd put the effort into my work, not being promoted, right? Um,
mhm.
so with that, as somebody that has been recently promoted to like staff, which for people who don't know, it's like staff at GitHub is like the step after senior. So like it's just a regular person, regular engineer, and then a senior engineer, and then a staff engineer. Like, what were some of the extra benefits, quote unquote? When I say benefits in quote, I mean like extra responsibilities that immediately showed up on your door when you went from senior to staff. Because I'd imagine they're just not going to let Brittany do the same stuff she was doing at a lower level, right?
It's a little weird actually. The way that we do promotions is you have to be doing the job for like a
Sure.
year
Yeah.
to be able to be promoted into it. So a lot of what I was doing before I was actually officially promoted was basically the same work. And really what that means is like what is the overall scope of things of the problems that you solve. So typically below senior level, they're, typically working on a team or on, a project with other people leading the project perhaps, and just like working on purely implementation. And then at senior level, you're leading more like team-wide projects that are something that your team is specifically solving. And then at staff level, you solve problems across multiple teams, essentially. So that was the type of work that I had been doing previously, where it's like, all right, I'm going to work on this problem that's going to solve things for like the business side and the different products within GitHub, and all of these different areas. I think it's a little bit easier too sometimes in a platform team to be able to do that because like just by nature of the work you're working across
Yeah.
the entire platform. So it's like a little bit easier to prove like, yeah, I can do this level of work. um but yeah, it's so that's really the only main difference is like it has to do with like the scope of the problem you solve and like how big of a problem you solve. And then I think at like the principal level, which comes next, they're like, all right, go solve reliability or
Yeah.
something like that, and
World
like
hunger.
just
Go solve
generic.
world hunger. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So how long have you been at GitHub, more or less?
4 years.
So a lot has changed in 4 years, right? Not only
Mhm.
for GitHub, but also like in technology. Like,
Mhm.
so I'm trying to think of like what was cool 4 years ago. I can't even remember. But like, um, obviously you've seen technology change so dramatically over the last 4 years. Like, what are some things that you saw as things were building initially that you were like, oh, this might be a thing, and then also, like, what were some things that you thought were 100% were gonna be a thing that weren't a thing at all?
That's a good question. Um, I thought that I got really into coding agents early last year, in like January or February of last year. And I thought that those were going to take off a lot faster than they did. I think now people are finally getting to the point where like, yay, coding agents.
Yeah.
Like they'll go, autonomously write code and complete it for you. But I went like really deep on them, I think early on, and because I was like, this is definitely going to be a thing. Um, but I think it took a while, and I think a lot of that has to do with like AI adoption has to be so much. It's not like a thing that comes natural to people. It's not a thing that they just like naturally start doing. Like, oh yeah, I'll use AI for things now. Like you have to go out of your way
Yeah.
to get worse at something until you get better at it. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily want to do that, especially if they're, really established in their career. Like, I know how to write code. I don't need assistance doing that. So I think that's one thing. I thought that I the like vibe coding apps, like what are they called? We have one at GitHub called Spark,
Yeah, yeah, like
where you can just
Lovable
like
or, yeah,
Lovable.
yeah,
Yeah, those
yeah,
are the other ones. That one I feel like is becoming less popular now.
sure.
And I don't know. I I think that that was like the idea is like, oh yeah, you're gonna very easily create your own app to solve this problem for whatever you need. But like, I don't think that's really a need that a lot of people have. I think even like testing that internally, I'm always like, make a cat themed calculator or
Yeah,
something like
sure.
ridiculous like that like you don't really need because you have a calculator already. Like you don't, it doesn't have to be a specific theme or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's one that I feel like it's probably falling
I always thought
short of
I always thought those
expectations.
kind of tools were not for technology people at all. I always thought those tools
Mhm.
were some mom and pop shop. They have a local business and it's like, oh, I need a web presence. Like, build me a website that I can take payments on. Like, that's what I thought the value of those. And then they started, like you said, they started kind of being like marketed to developers. And I think a lot of developers were like, no, no, thumbs down. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of that. It's funny that you talk about the coding agents thing, and I have a theory as to why, like, we've taken a almost a year and a half to this point to like really believe that these things can actually just run off and go and do work for us. And the reason why I think it's because it's not about handing the keys to someone, it's about being okay with the black box again. Because I think that in
Mhm.
technology, we've been very guilty of, I need to know what's in that box. Like, don't just give me a black box, like let me open it and do the things. And that's why I thought that MCP was as popular as it was, because it, to an extent, like, you know exactly what it's doing, right? Like, oh, I had the Playwright MCP. I know exactly what this thing does. It's going to go and scrape the web and do some things that Playwright does because I've used Playwright before, and so on and so forth. When you go to the part where like you're using tools and skills, you're kind of obfuscating or abstracting away like what you know the thing does. And to the point now where it's like, hey, I give it like a 2 paragraph prompt and it just goes and does whatever it wants and comes back. So I think it's about not just relinquishing control, but also the idea of like not knowing what it's doing during that process. And I'd love to kind of get your thoughts as to like that progression from Gen AI to building on top of Gen AI to basically being like, just build it. I don't care. Just build it.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It feels like software engineering now is really more about like being a product manager and being a QA person, like
Yeah,
on either side, where in ways I think that I build a lot better than I did before because I'm spending more time thinking about like how can this go wrong and like planning for that while the implementation is actually happening. And thinking more about like, all right, how do I QA this and make sure it's going to work and like actually solve the problem? And then I'm also thinking more about like what is the problem that needs to be solved and is this the right way to do it instead of like being in the weeds figuring out like, oh, I got this obscure error, like let me go look up on Stack Overflow how to solve
sure.
this, or
Yeah.
like, just getting stuck a lot along the way. So I think that uh I personally really enjoy it. I feel like I've never really, I think part of not, starting out in computer science, I don't really like value my code writing
Sure.
necessarily as
Sure.
like, oh, I'm like a really good writer of code. Like, no, don't, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm a very mediocre coder. Count me out for leak code. That's
Says
not
says
me.
the software engineer at GitHub says that, right? Okay. Anyway, I didn't know if
Yikes,
you could
yeah.
get it. Yeah.
But yeah, like I've never really like seen that as part of my identity where I'm like, oh, I need to know the code and
Yeah.
like the code is very important. I'm more like I want this thing to be built. I like to build things. I
Mm-hmm.
like to solve these problems. And so I think that folks with that mindset have had like a little bit of an easier time adopting AI because like really a lot of it just to get to the scale that, agentic AI is supposed to be getting to, like you have to let go of knowing how everything works
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's really hard for some people because some people really do love that, and that's valid.
Yeah. Well, you say
Yeah.
like, caring more about the inputs and outputs, right? Like you mentioned the quality assurance thing. Like, and I don't know if this was happening like when you first started getting into tech, but there's a point in time where like every big software company had like a quality assurance team, or there's quality assurance people that were a part of product teams. And then that went away. It went away. And people were very up in arms, like, okay, so who's going to do the QA now? And the response was, well, the devs are going to do QA on their own work now. And there was some uprising and people, whatever. And it's funny now that like a large part of a developer's job is QA, almost probably more. Obviously some companies are adopting AI faster than others, but if you're a heavy adopter of AI, like your engineers are doing more QA work than actually writing code work, right? And
Hmm.
and I'm curious as your thoughts, like, obviously I think you personally, after talking to you for the last 40 minutes, like you kind of enjoy the QA piece of things. Um, but I'd imagine also there you don't get as much satisfaction out of QAing like someone else's work as you would QAing your own work, right? So talk to me a
Mhm.
little bit about like how you go about thinking of like having to review code that you can't go and like talk to and figure out like, hey Joe, what were you thinking when you wrote this? Because you're interacting with the LLM at that point, and they're always going to give you the answer that you want.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think that part of the QAing too is also not just looking at like the code that was written, but like the overall like architecture and why it was written a specific way. And I feel like LLMs, since they write code so quickly, it makes it really cheap to go and change that. So I
Mm-hmm.
feel like a lot of the reviewing of the code is, even though there's a lot more to review overall, like I more look at like the broad strokes of like, is this like an efficient way to get this, and worry less about like the very specific things. Because especially we have, I mean, we have review tools now too that
Yeah,
do a lot of like the nitpicky type stuff, or like aligning, like, oh, are we using the right same terminology throughout the code base or whatever? Like, you don't really need to worry about that as much now. So I don't know. I think that it is. I wouldn't say that I've ever been somebody who really loves QA, but that is a lot more of the job now,
sure.
and I don't mind. I think it's easier to work with an LLM who has very, loose
Don't
opinions
say it.
about
Don't
the way
say
that
it.
something is
I
done
know what you're gonna say. Don't say it. Don't say it. Don't say it.
versus some engineers I've
Yeah.
worked
No.
with,
Okay.
like
Okay. All right.
some people are very passionate, like this is the way I did it and this is
Yeah.
the way that I want to do
Yeah.
it. So it's like, all right, well, that's fine.
That's
Yeah.
funny. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I 100% agree. Like, I think that they're like taking humanity out of some things, like also like very bad. Taking humanity out of some things, very bad. Taking humanity out of other things, maybe good? Question mark. Um, I do find it funny too. Like we there's a lot of conversation about in 6 months in a year, like do we care about what languages we're writing tool code in? We don't really care as much about like what tools or frameworks we're using. We care about, like we were talking about a bit earlier, like inputs and outputs. I'm curious for you, like obviously over your career, you've probably worked in a few different languages, right? And I'd love to kind of get your thoughts, is because eventually you have to review these things. And if you, let's just fast forward a year from now, and Brittany asks some cool new LLM tool, AI agent tool, write me an app that does this, and it creates it in some language you've never read before, you've never even touched before. Like, how do you go about trying to solve that problem? Do you just turn it back, like, actually, no, I don't know this. Write it in C sharp or write it in Python or whatever languages you know? Or do you go about trying to learn how that language works? This is like a question that I've been thinking about for a while. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I feel like that's already happening a bit to me because I've used a lot of different languages, but I've never really spent any time using Python. And that seems to be the go-to language for
Sure.
any time I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, can you go write a script to do this? Or like, help me parse this data. It always reaches Claude, at least, and Copilot always reach for like a Python script. Um, and I feel like I know enough about enough coding languages now where I'm like, I can fake it enough
Yeah.
to know like, this kind of looks okay. Like I can't tell you where a semicolon belongs in Python, if it even belongs in it. Or like,
Yeah.
I know I read def over and over again, but that's like the extent of it that I know.
That's the interpreter's job
Um,
anyway, to tell you when things are wrong, right?
Exactly. Yeah, there's enough tools up there that help with the developer experience that I don't think it's really that necessary to know the ins and outs of every single language now. I think if you know one really well and you've like done the flex into another language to know like, all right, how do I figure out how something works in Go now when I've spent all my time writing JavaScript? Um, but a lot of languages now too, I think are, you know, fairly easy to read
Yeah. Yeah.
because they all have very similar conventions. They just look a little bit different. Than once you learn one well, I think you're pretty much good. It's like learning like Spanish. Like you probably know you can fake Italian a bit to
Sure.
like get around that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I disagree with the languages thing. Like as somebody who has been learning Spanish for 20 years and is not very good at Spanish still, every time I'll read something and I'll be like, that's not Spanish. And I try to like, okay, what is that word? And I'll have to like Google translate it, right? It's usually Portuguese. Like Portuguese does some weird things with words where I just am like, I don't know that word. Um, but I think it's funny too, somebody mentioned this the other day and I kind of immediately kind of like got grossed out by it, where it's like the new programming language is like English. which um, I have really interesting like opinions on. But I kind of like to get your thoughts. Is like it's very true. Like no matter where you're from in the world, if you're an engineer, like you're writing code using prompts in English more than likely. Not to say that maybe people in China are using Chinese or people in Spain are using Spanish or whatever, but like predominantly everybody's writing it in English, right? I kind of get your and somebody and the reason why this person said this is their follow up was, in English is a horrible language to define things. And I kind of like to get your thoughts is like, are we, I know, to quote the kids, are we cooked if like everybody's writing code like using English sentences instead of like syntactical sugar?
That's a good question. I don't think that it's really new that code is primarily written in English. I think now actually is probably it's I don't know. I am have the privilege, I guess, of growing up somewhere where English was
Sure.
my primary language, and so it's I got very lucky going into software engineering because everything's written in English. All of the JavaScript and Python and C Sharp, all of those are very English based languages to begin with, and then you look at a lot of the tools like GitHub specifically, like it's all in English. Like there's no I think there's some localization, but like certainly not every single language. So I think that that's always kind of been the case, and English is a little quirky too, to your point, where I think that there's a lot of different ways that things can be interpreted, especially with how people, different styles and how people write. But I think it's probably better now than it has been in the past, because I bet that you can actually write Markdown in a different language now and have it be
Yeah.
translated a little bit easier into LLMs. Like I think LLMs can take instructions in Spanish now and like speak Spanish back. I don't know if there's quite as much training material in
Yeah.
Spanish as there is in English, so maybe the results are not necessarily as good. But I feel like it's probably better overall for somebody who's like not a native English speaker getting into the career now compared to what it has been in the past.
Yeah, I've seen people use like chat, like the voice, like of like the voice commands for like Copilot and ChatGPT and things like that in Spanish, and it obviously does it just fine. I just naturally curious.
Mhm.
It's like because sometimes like if you're like I was trying to do this experiment the other day where it's like I know exactly what this function needs to do. I could write it myself. I want to tell the LLM exactly what to do and see how close it is to what I imagined, right? Like knowing that it would probably take me 20 minutes to write this function, but I wanted to see like if I could define it in a way, like exactly. Like, and I'm saying like I want there to be a for loop that does this, and then it's going to massage this day to do this. And I felt so uncomfortable, like because I think that we are very good at defining things at a very top level, but as we
Mhm.
go lower and lower and lower to like the I need you to write a statement that is a conditional check on this string that does this, you start to feel very, very uncomfortable saying it out loud. It's much easier to type it, right? And I
Mhm.
wonder if that's just because we're so disposed to speaking like how normal people speak. And like if you're trying to instruct something to like write something exactly how you want to write, it's not, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's some discourse too now about like whether people like use polite language or whatever to talk
Sure.
to their LLMs. Where like if I'm saying something out loud, of course I'm going to say please, like always.
Yeah.
I actually type please as well, and I feel like I type a lot like how
Well, they
I
said
actually
OpenAI said
interact.
that you're burning down trees saying please, just so we're clear.
Yeah, that's valid. But
But that's what you want to do,
I'm
and that's
burning
it's
down
about.
trees regardless.
That's
Yeah.
fair. That's totally fair.
Yeah.
More than fair. Um, as we wrap up, like I think that we'd be remiss in not talking about the fact that like you have a podcast as well that I've listened to, and it's very, very good. Not trying to like
Thank you.
stoke your ego, but it's very good.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious to know, like, as somebody who decided to start a podcast for no real reason other than being lonely, like we were talking about, being a remote person, like, what was some of the reasons for you wanting to be a part of the Overcommitted podcast?
Yeah, so it was started by a group of folks that I previously worked on a team together with when we all worked in GitHub Actions, and we had been meeting pretty regularly. As like an onboarding group, we all started at GitHub around the same time, just to like share knowledge. And we'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I learned how to do this thing. Can you like share it with me so that we can also learn that as well?" And that kind of continued on once there was a big reorg where all four of us were reorged into different teams and we were in very different parts of the org. And then we realized like, oh, wow, now we get to share like all of these other things we're learning in the rest of the org. And I feel like it almost got even better. And we realized at that point, like actually like having people that are really excited and interested in learning something and like learning from them and like absorbing that excitement is really kind of fun. So we decided to start the podcast. That way we like continued to meet basically and continued to chat with folks. And then eventually we started bringing other folks on and interviewing them. And it's been a really great way. I think it's a good way to like network with people
Yeah.
remotely. I think that's a big thing that I miss. I mean, I get that, I guess, going to conferences, but that's not like a thing I can do every single
Sure.
week or whatever. So it's a good way to like meet other people that are out there on the internet and want to talk about the thing that they're passionate about. And it's cool just to see like also just what people are excited about and like see like, oh, what is it that drives you and like gets you excited about working in engineering and like is there hope still, for this thing that you particularly work on? Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to explain it to somebody that's not in tech. And I said, if you can trap someone in a room and ask them like what they're interested in, like they will talk until you tell them to stop talking, right? And that's how I
Mhm.
kind of feel doing a podcast. It's like, obviously there are some guests that are great and some guests that aren't great because that's just how life is. But I think too, if you can really find somebody and find that niche of whatever they enjoy doing, they will just talk until there's no more air in the room. And I love that because it helps me, one, continue my natural curiosity. So, as we wrap up, I'm curious, like for you, like what are you curious about over the next 6 months? Like what are some things, obviously, crystal ball needed, but like what are some things that you're seeing today that, might excite Brittany so much that in 6 months, Brittany is like making it a part of their life?
Yeah, I think lately I've been learning a lot about at Proto. Like I mentioned, I've
Yeah.
gone to
Yeah.
Atmosphere Conf. That was great. And there is a big community. I am in the Portland, Oregon area, so there's a big community around PDX at Proto where folks are meeting and like, just generating excitement about what that can bring. And I'm really interested to see like this intersection of like now it's easier than ever using at Proto to build social applications. And
Yeah.
we have AI available to build social applications even faster. Like I'm very interested to see how communities can grow and develop and like extend themselves online, maybe in a way that they haven't been able to in the past because, they're always stuck with like Facebook groups or whatever
Sure.
available to them. So I think, yeah, having maybe actually good social experiences online is what I'm most interested in. We'll see if that
Uh,
comes to fruition
what
or
is
not.
what did they
But
what did they say on Game of Thrones? Like you sweet summer child. Like we know for a fact if it's online, it is gonna go bad eventually. Like I was talking to somebody
True.
about this actually like a couple of weeks ago because I've been on Reddit for like a long, long time. And Reddit was always like really weird, but like Reddit was also like very, very cool for some time. And now Reddit is like wild. Like it's like the
Hmm.
stuff that's going on Reddit whenever I even the subreddits that I'm on, I'm like, why are people talking about this here? Um, so I think that in general, but I love your optimism about online communities, and maybe one day it'll be good. Which I think we can all strive to. I think too, like as we wrap up, like from a technology standpoint, like we talked about AI and LLMs a lot, obviously in this conversation. It's like, what do you think the happy medium is for you personally with your AI usage? Like I think we talked about this a little bit, but like are you completely comfortable at one point in time in your career where you don't write any code ever again?
Uh, yeah, I think that that's going to be a thing.
Yeah.
I think even right now, when I typically have a few things going on with a coding agent where I really don't write anything, and then also working in an IDE with, agent mode on or whatever that is for your tool of choice.
Sure.
Um, I think I spend more time writing in English than I do actually writing code. It's very rare where I'm like, oh, I get to go change the CSS variable
I did that
myself.
today and I was like,
Yeah,
whoa. I felt
I haven't done that in a
like
while.
artisanal CSS. It was great. Like
Yeah,
it
yeah.
I felt like it wasn't worth to like waste my one premium request in Copilot to like,
Hmm.
change the CSS property from like center to left. I felt
Yep.
this isn't necessary. I can just do it myself because you know what? I'm a developer. Um,
Yep.
So it seems to me like, and this is just a statement, and I don't mean it to be offensive in any way, but I think that folks that are newer in tech, I feel like they've been substantially more accepting of what the new normal
Mhm.
is, um, because I think you don't have all the baggage of back in my day we had to take our punch cards uphill both ways in the snow, right? But I think that and this is kind of the thing that I'd like to end on is like, for people that are getting into tech today, obviously the people that are getting into tech today are substantially their experience is different than yours when you were getting into tech, however long ago that was. Like, if you were to give any advice to somebody that maybe they were in college or maybe they just graduated and they were like, I wanted to be an engineer, like what advice would you give them?
Mm, don't listen to Twitter.
Oh, well,
um
that's just for life in general. That's nothing to do with tech. That's just in
for
life,
life
but
in
yeah, yeah.
general. But yeah, like I think there's like a lot of hype and stuff where everybody's just like, oh my gosh, like we're not gonna need software engineers ever again. Like, no, that's not true. Like I think that is a cyclical thing where I think the same thing happened when, when I was getting into tech, offshoring jobs away
Sure.
from the US was
Yep.
really, really common. And everybody's like, oh, we don't need software engineers in the US anymore. It doesn't make sense to go to software engineering. And then there was a big tech boom like 3 or 4 years later. So I think that we're gonna see that again. Just hold out and like don't read into any of the hype or strong opinions that come across. Just learn as much as you can.
But what about your own strong opinions?
Oh, my strong opinions are the right ones.
There we
So,
go. There we go. Right.
yeah.
I can't remember. There's a saying. It's like be right and be right often or whatever. I think that's like an AWS leadership principle, where it's like
Yeah.
just admit that like you're kind of very opinionated and have it just be okay, which I think is totally fine.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think as we wrap up, I want to thank you for your time, and I think it's been great to talk to you about what you're seeing in the industry, what your experience is working at one of the major players in this space. And I highly recommend folks that maybe they have been following Brittany before but they're curious to know a little bit more about what she's working on. Blue Sky is probably a good place, so BrittanyEllich.com, so BrittanyEllich.com. That was a lot, and I did it successfully because I was reading it. But
Nice
also,
one.
yeah, but also like the Overcommitted podcast is a place, and there'll be some links to some other social handles as well as the podcast in the show notes. Before we sign off, my friend, do you have any parting words?
Uh, no, I think be curious. Keep being curious. I think that is going to be, you know, a useful skill now and into the future, even when things are changing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in general, I think us in tech have to be curious by nature, and um, being extra curious right now is super important because I don't know if you knew this, but like every day there's more news, and
Mhm.
like it's a full time job reading the news, um, which makes it hard. But I have an AI that tells me the news anyway, so makes my life a bit
Mhm.
easier. This has been great, Brittany. I want to thank you so much again for your time, and I want to thank the folks who are watching live, as well as the folks that are listening in the future. So my name is Isaac Levin. This has been Coffee and Open Source. Be sure to share this episode with your friends if you like it, and let me know what you think. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. For my friend Brittany, take care.
Thank you.